Hi and welcome to today's video. In this video I'm going to show you how you can create this high contrast kind of stylized render. And I just want to say the inspiration I got from this is from this Instagram page by Teklim. And you can see they have these high contrast vibrant colors and you can see her modeling it in herself. So I was like, I want to create this. So I jumped into Vray in 3ds Max and I created this, and I'm going to show you how you can create your own versions too. So I've started seeing a bit off in terms of I've brought in some assets here, something to hang on the wall, some things to put on the table itself, and a sofa to put in the middle. In the middle, I've already put in a box with a partition wall in the middle. Nothing serious. I'm not going to show how to model this. It's very simple stuff. What I am going to start with though is placing the objects in our scene where we want them. Now, you could set up a camera now, but I'm not going to set it up just yet. So I've set my main room in the center of the world. This kind of makes it handy, so I can just grab all these objects, hit W, go here and go 0, 0, 0. Now they're all in the center. And then I'm going to grab the couch. We can move this down. I'm going to go into my top view by hitting T, move up, and I'm going to push this all the way against the wall. Like so. Then I'm going to grab, say, the table, or in this case we have the portrait, which is in the middle. And we're going to go top view again. Push this up. We can hit S to snap because the pivot's in the right location and put it there. So we have that in the correct top height view, but not on the front view. But don't worry about that just yet. We're then going to grab our table. I'm going to move it roughly around here. Grab our objects and place them in the top view. Now, of course, then we have to go into the front view and fix a bit of this. So again, we're going to hit snap. And we're going to snap this to the top of our table. And I'm going to snap this to the top of our table. If you don't have snaps, you can hold down Shift, right click, and you can select the snaps you want. You can also go up here, right click, and you can do your snaps here. Now, another thing you want to do is you want to fix the height of this. I'm going to put it in the smack center of this wall, which I think is 1.5. So in the Z up here, I'm going to go 1.5. It's down here if you can't see it. And that's pretty much it in terms of setting up our room. We can change this now, but the next step I want to do is I want to add in a camera and I want to add in lights. Okay, now let's create our camera. So go to your create over here and then click your cameras and bring it down to Vray. So once you have that selected, click Vray physical camera, and I'm just going to click and drag it on. And what I like to do personally is I grab this, hit W, and I just reset these back to the center of the world. I do the same with the target. And then I can grab this camera right here and move it out. And Control W and hit C to go into our camera, and here we go. So now what I can do is, let's open up my layers panel. And you can see I have my layer set up. I'm going to hit W, and I want this in the center of my whole room, which I know is 1.5. So I can type in 1.5, and then I have my camera exactly in the center of our shot. Now, obviously, we need to change a few more settings because it doesn't look quite right. So we're a bit too close. So let's go to our top view up here. Our target's fine where it is, but we're going to select this camera, and I'm going to move it back. Now, the issue is when we move this back, we're going actually out of the scene or out of this room. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to go into our modify up here, and we're going to find the clipping. So go down here, distortion and clipping, which you find here, and we're going to click this on. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to near clipping plane. If I hit F3 here, you might be able to see this. If I start zooming this in, you'll see this red line right here start to appear. There we go. You might see that red line appear. So if I start bringing this up and up, eventually it'll clip through that wall and we'll be able to see inside. So now that we know this clips that surface, we can put it roughly where we want. Just for my OCD sake, I'm going to put this at 2.2 just to be a bit even. The far clipping we don't need to adjust because we're going as far as we want. You'll see it shoot up all around here. If you want to make this a bit closer just to look a bit better, we can put this at like 20 meters so it's not ridiculously outside the scene. Now the next shot is, you'll see this actually works pretty well. The one thing you also want to change is I have this set, my actual render settings in here, to 1080 by 1080. And that's to keep a perfect square. It's what you'd put in an Instagram post. It would be 1080 by 1080. So with that, you can see we have a perfectly good square here. The one thing is I want to see if I can adjust the field of view. So I'm going to click this, and it's not actually 10 at the moment. Once you click this, then it's going to adjust to 10. And you can see it. We can pull this in and out and get a better look and feel of what we want. I found that something around 44, I think, works for me. You can go a bit lower, maybe 42, and we get that look I'm looking for. Another thing we want to do is in the tilt and shift settings around here, I'm going to make sure I have that checked. I usually have that checked for shots that are straight on, and not for shots that you're looking up and down on. So now that we have that done, the next step would be just to add in the lighting. Now in terms of the lighting source, I just want to go back to the image and show you what it looks like. So you can see that there are shadows, but they're very subtle, and you can't immediately tell where all the light sources are coming from. You can tell that there's a slight light source here, some light source here, but also we have inside lit up, and that's on purpose. I don't want any incredibly strong shadows, or I don't want any directional light being clear and obvious. So what we're going to do is we're going to light from all corners. From this direction, they're going to be the same light in terms of intensity and value. And then in here, from these two corners, we're going to have the same lights with their same intensity. So we can control the light from the outside and control the light from the inside. So let's do that now. So let's insert some lights. So straight away, go to Create, Lights, Vray, and Vray Light. I'm going to go into the left view, and I'm going to draw on a light just like so. I'm going to go into my top view, and I'm going to put this where I need it to be, rotate it 180, and we're going to start moving this until it hits pretty much that wall. Now this is the internal room light, so I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm going to make sure it's an instance and click OK. I'm going to rotate this around until it hits roughly around here. I don't mind it being out of the room as long as the main light source is inside. So somewhere around here, we can always change it later. So then what I'm going to do is I like that light source. I'm going to bring it back down here. I'm going to make this just a copy, and I'm going to rotate this in like that, down like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the pivot of this object, effect pivot. I'm going to make sure it's in the center of the world. Uncheck that, and then I'm going to duplicate it to the other side 90 degrees. And I'm going to make sure this one's an instance. So select OK. And basically what I've done is these two are now locked together in terms of inputs, and these two are locked together in terms of inputs. So the inside here and the outside here are going to be matching lights. So let's pop into our scene, and now let's see what we have. All the materials, I've just assigned a basic Vray material, and I'm going to hit render and see what it looks like. So pretty boring, I know, but we'll get there. So the main thing is we need to change the lighting in here, and don't go in here and start adjusting these. So if I stop this and I render with this, it's like, oh, there's my scene. Perfect. What I'll do is I'll add in a exposure, and I'll start adjusting the exposure and changing the highlight and changing the contrast. I'm like, perfect. Don't do that at the beginning. Do that at the end when you're happy with your scene and you want to make final minute changes, not big macro changes. So I'm going to delete that up here and keep it just as this basic scene. I'm going to re-render this. So instead of changing it in that, what you want to do is, like a photographer, you want to change the exposure on your equipment. So in our case, our camera. So select our camera, go into modify. And one thing I don't like is this blue grid. So what I do is I go down to proportion guides down here, and I click custom, and I have 2x2 and this black and white. So just get out of the way. Now, the only thing we need to worry about is the aperture here. So I'm going to minimize everything we don't need to look at. So switch off all these, switch off that. And now all we have is the aperture. So the top one film speed here, we don't need to worry about. That can stay 100. Just don't increase it. You can go higher for artistic reasons, but most times out of 10, you do not want to change this. Now the F number, if I go into the top thing, this is more relevant if you're going to add in depth of field and stuff like that. So for this case, we don't need to worry too much. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure it fits, encompasses pretty much our entire scene as tight as possible. So somewhere around 6.5, you can see this area fits in. Then our shutter speed we're going to have to change, and that's the main thing that's going to change the brightness. So this means per second, so this 200 of a second, I'm going to change this to something like 50th of a second. And you can see it gets super bright. So it's because it's letting in more light. So what I'm going to do is, so if I set this like 1, that's 1 second that shutter is open for, which is obviously way too much. So it's somewhere around 100. Looks good. Again, it's a bit too dark, so I found that around somewhere around 80 is good because it doesn't get too overexposed, but it's just bright enough. I don't mind these walls being super bright. We can also adjust that later, but I think it will give the materials a good look. So with that in mind, if you want to, you could adjust these lights. The main thing you would do with these lights, with the light lister here, the new updated one, is I would go over here and I change the shadow bias to 0.002, and the same with this one. That just makes the lights a bit more realistic, I find, the shadow. And I also want these to be invisible. Now that doesn't mean the light source is invisible, it just means the emission of that light is invisible, like you just see the light coming from it, if that makes any sense. So with that, looking at that, since I adjusted those, maybe I should change that camera a bit more. So going back here, I'm going to change this to maybe 85 to bring that down because it is a bit too bright. Maybe 90. Okay, because we don't want to get too dark around here. So I think we're going to go back to 85. Happy medium in between both of those. So one other thing I'm going to change is you can see that the outside here is a bit too bright and the inside it's a bit too dark. So this is why I set the lights up in such a way that I can adjust the inside here and the outside here. So this is the outside light. I should have named them, but that's fine for the moment. So let's just put this to 15 just so we can actually see the change. There we go. So put that to 25 and we get a bit more softer look here. And then in here we can increase this. I'm going to increase it by a large amount and then go back. So 60, bit too much, but it's not too far off. So let's go 40. That looks good. Still a bit too dark. So I'm going to go somewhere maybe 48. And there we go. Now we get a nice bright interior and we get a nice bright exterior on both ends. So I'm happy with that, and that's a handy way to be able to change both lights inside and outside by creating instances instead of loads of copies. So now let's add a bit of life by adding in materials. Okay, so now we're on to the fun stuff, which is the material. So you can see we have our scene lit up here, but now we need to add in color. Now an easy way to do this is to select our objects and add material to each one and then put the color on. But what if you're working with a scene which has many objects, unlike this one, and it has a client which wants to change the colors throughout? Well, I'm going to create a setup which it makes it very easy to change the colors quickly and efficiently while maintaining the look and feel. So the first thing is everything has this default end material that I created. It's just a basic V-Ray material. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another one and I'm going to call this my main color. So I've now assigned this main color material to everything in my scene. And now I'm going to change the preset here to a material I like, which is the red velvet. Now, obviously when we render this, it's going to look a bit odd. So I'm going to hit render just to show you what it looks like. As you can see, it looks pretty odd with the color and everything like that, but we're going to change that just now. So let me hit stop. And for the default color, it doesn't really matter at the moment, but we can change this back to something like gray or whatever. At the moment, it doesn't matter because what we're going to do is we're going to use what I call a V-Ray multi-sub texture, if I can find it. What this is going to do is I'm going to make sure it's only about 4 of these. And in each one of these, I'm going to assign a color. So at the moment, I'm just going to pick some random colors. Click here, to red, another color, maybe a bit wacky, some high contrast images. So anything will do really at this stage, we can always change it. And I'm going to put this into the diffuse. So now I'm going to say this is going to drive the color of my objects. So now that I have these colors, if I was to hit render, you can see that now we have these crazy colors going on. how is it being assigned? Well, here we have get ID from face material ID. So all these faces on these objects have different IDs. So how do you assign those? Well, let me show you. So I'm going to select, say, the couch. Over here, we're going to go to modify, polygon, and let's just select all. And for the moment, I'm going to go over here, scroll down, and we can see here set ID. So if you see around here. Now, what I could do is go select ID. So I go 1, I'm going to go select ID, and it's going to select everything with 1, or else I can go 2, select, it has all the 2 here, and 3, select ID, it has all here. So let's see if I change this now. I'm going to go set ID, I'm going to change this to 4. And then you can see that's now changed color, but what's it changed to 2? So if I go back to my material, it's gone back here and it's changing it to this color here. So I can start switching this out, and all of a sudden it changes all those objects to exactly what I want. Click OK. And just like that, we have these high contrast colors, and we can change it with just one material. If you had a bunch of materials, you'd have to change each individual color throughout, but you can just go in here and switch these out, and that's how I create something like this. Now, the only thing else you have to do is you have to change the material, say. So this is fine if you wanted one material looking all the same, but I want to change these to like porcelain, and this table to look a bit shinier. So what I'm going to do is don't duplicate both. I'm just going to duplicate this one, scroll this down, and I'm going to change this to porcelain, I think is in it here, ceramic. Let's go ceramic, so it looks a bit shinier. So you can see that looks a bit shinier there. So how can I assign this without changing everything? Well, so let me get out of that. And then I'm going to go here, grab, say, the table. I'm going to go material, and I'm going to assign this to the table. So now if I look at this, we see a lot more shine coming off that table. Let me zoom in a bit so you can see it a bit better. Let me just isolate that section. And as you can see, this table looks a lot shinier. We also want to assign it to these objects. So you can go in here and you can go to select objects, which is control click. And you have that object now. We can assign this, control click that, and we can assign this again. And now they both have the material and they have a bit more shine to them. Okay, now that we've assigned the materials and the colors that we kind of like, the one thing I want to change is this floor, because it's kind of disappearing with the wall. We don't, even if we were to change the color, I want to add a bit of a checkered look and some fabric in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit stop here. I'm going to go into my material library here, and the one I want to pick is this fabric pastel blue. I'm going to click and drag this on, and then assign this to our floor. Now, one thing I want to do is, you see this color, they've added this color correction to change the color. I want to put this hue and saturation back down to the middle, and I also want to kill the saturation. I don't want too much or any color really in this. And then brightness, it can be brought down to the middle, and that's fine the way it is. So once that's assigned, I'm going to hit render and show you what it looks like. Now you can see that the color is a bit off, and you might be asking yourself, well, why is that? Because it should technically look kind of like this. Well, it's because the color of the wall. So the light is hitting this wall, and the color of this wall is changing the color of this. I'm perfectly fine for that at the moment. We can always change that later. But the one thing I want to change is the material we have on this, and the denoiser's not helping. Maybe uncheck that. We're not seeing much, fabric here. We want to see a bit more. Even if I was to zoom in, it's very subtle. So I want to exaggerate that. So in my Vray planer, I'm going to go to my mapping source, go to Vray, UV randomizer, assign that, and I'm going to make sure the blur is at 0, and by default it's going to be 1 by 1, which I think will work well first. So let's see what happens, and you can see now we're starting to see that fabric. Now the simple act of adding the checker is just that, going into maps, going into general, and then going to our checker. Then we also want to go to maps, general, composite, and there we pretty much have everything we need to make that checkered fabric look. So let's minimize that. We're going to go into our composite. We're going to plug in our main material into the layer 1, go back to our composite, add another layer, input our layer 2 checkery, and then we're going to plug this into the diffuse. And just like that, we get the checker look. But at the moment, if I hit C now, you'll see we're just seeing the checker. We see no fabric on top. So we need to change this normal here down to overlay would be probably one of the better ones. And then we're going to get both of them coming through. Now we still have that color coming in, and that's fine, and it makes sense because it should be reflecting the color of that. So we'll change this color, this pink value, in post if we really want to, but it should look like that. So now that we have the materials and the look and the feel pretty much where we want, this is the part where we can now start looking at these and seeing what we can change in this. So this is why I left this to last, because that's how it should be technically done. You don't touch this stuff really until you're like, okay, I'm happy with the lighting, I'm happy with the materials. Let's see what I can do here now. So let's jump straight into that. So now I've rendered out my scene, I've saved it here, and now we can start making some changes over on this side. So what changes are we going to make? So I've actually added a light mix. You might be on RGB, switch to light mix and make sure you add a light mix. And what does that do? Well, basically I can switch on and off this light in post. I can do both lights and we can't see anything, but you can see these are the lights in the front and these are the lights in the back. So very quickly I could say, okay, let's bring this light way down and make that darker inside. Now I don't want that, but I could go something like 0.75, something like that, and then outside lights I can make even brighter, or I can make much darker. So we can go something like maybe tiny bit. I'm going to go 0.95, and this way we can change the lights in post and not have to worry. You can also, if you really wanted to, I'm not going to in this case, but you can change the color of your lights and really change how it looks completely. You can also do that in the inside as well, or you could just change the temperature here so you get something cooler or warmer, whichever look you're kind of looking for. I'm going to hit cancel and I'm going to keep the same thing. So that's something that's really powerful in Vray, and this is step one of our production, post-production, where we're going to make edits here, and then our final edits will be in Photoshop, which are going to be very minor tweaks. So the first thing we want to do is now we can add in, the first thing I do is a white balance, and then I add an exposure. And these two kind of work together. So in a white balance, you can go like, I want it to be slightly warmer look, or I want to look cooler. I'm going to go slightly warmer, and this one you need to be quite subtle with, because it can really drastically change your image. I'm going to push the greens up a tiny bit, like that's subtle. You might even be able to see it on your screen. So the exposure, again, we can go like, okay, how much do I want to give and push? Maybe I want to bring that down a bit. But the main thing is I want to bring the contrast a good bit up. And when I do that, I also want to push the exposure probably a bit down. Now the highlight burn, I don't usually change that much. I think it makes your images look quite flat if you put this down. I would keep that pretty high, if not to the max, because overexposure looks good in some cases, like around here and now the edges of your scene. So then what you could do if you really wanted to, what I can do is you can change a lot. So in curves, you can select here and you can start adding again a bit more contrast. You can reduce the contrast. It's something that is really up to you in these final steps. So I'm just going to start pushing and pulling until I get something I like. You can see down at the bottom here, the color is going from those tiles, which is something I do want. So I'm going to push this so we get more of a black and white feel here rather than the light over enveloping the color down here. And then lastly, what I do sometimes is you can do a film tone map, and what I do, by default it's good to put some settings in there already, but what I do is I push and pull this. So do I like this? No, I don't. So we go the opposite way and reduce it. I can go up this way. I don't like that, so I go the opposite way and I start pushing and pulling this in extreme values, and then I reduce it. So toe strength, push it up. I don't like that, that's too much. And then white point, push this forward and down and see what it does. And then if you're like, oh, that's too much, but I like some of it, you can go in here and you can change this to say something lower the opacity. So I only want this like 0.2, so it's extremely subtle, but it does change it a bit. And then once you're happy with these, you can just render this out. You can either go up here and go file, save all images to a single file, or separate files, and we're going to save this as TIFF. So if I go file, save all, I'm going to go down here, I'm going to select my TIFF, and you can say 0029 and render. save, and I'm going to pick 16 bits so we have a bit more control in Photoshop for our bit rate. Okay, so once you click OK, hit render, and we'll do the final touches in Photoshop. Okay, so now I've loaded the layers I want into Photoshop, and I've saved it as a PSD. When I saved as 16-bit, you can see the file itself is 16. If you want to check, go image mode, and I say I have RGB and I have 16 bits. So this gives me a bit more control. And what I'll do is, first thing is I have this AO, ambient occlusion, which just adds in the darkest areas, adds those shadows in. Now I want to be extremely subtle with this. So if I change this to multiply, like there, you can see it's extremely strong. So I'm going to bring this down to something like 10%, something extremely subtle that you just see it in here. You just get that bit of extra shadow. So happy with that. I'm then going to select the floor, and with the floor selected, and then I'm going to go to down here, and I'm going to select my curves right here. Once I have that selected, what I like to do is I add a point in here, here, and here, and this allows me to get the midtones, the highlights, and the shadows. So as I move this up and down, I decide if I like it or not. So I go up, I like that, and then I go left and right, and I'm like, okay, I like it there. And I do that for each point. So I go up and down, and with this one, you can see if you look in this section here, you'll see this change, because that's like the shadows in here. They'll start changing the shadows. So I want a bit subtle, so I bring that up, and then I change this up and down, left and right, and we get that more white look, white and black look, rather than this color overpowering it. So if I flick this on and off, we get a much more contrasting image, which is exactly what we want. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to hit Control, Shift, Alt, and E. That's going to merge it into one. I'll call it merged. And I'm going to go into Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and click in here. And I'm going to go for something large like this. So I'm going to put this radius way up, click OK. I'm going to do the exact same, Filter, Sharpen, Unsharpen. I'm going to bring this all the way down, and then I'm going to bring this to a really high value. And then I'm going to click OK. Now, if you zoom in, if I was to switch this on and off, you can see it adds in that bit of sharpness, especially around here. So if I click the sharpen on, you see we're getting that sharp look, and it gives us a bit of a nice light on the edge. There's another way to add contrast, which you might have seen before. I'm going to duplicate this one. I'm going to call it high pass. Go in here, go filter, other, high pass, and you want this quite low, 0.9 will probably work. Click OK, and then switch this to overlay. And that will also give you that kind of extra bit of contrast and an extra bit of pop in your image. Again, it might be a bit too strong here. You can either bring down this, or if you really wanted to, you could add a mask, invert that mask, and then you can just paint in where you wanted to add contrast. So in here, on these edges, around down here, along the floor. But I'm fine with that, so delete the mask and we're happy out. So that's pretty much it. The last thing is up to you. If you want to, again, Control, Shift, Alt, E, and you can go to Filter, you can go to Lens Correction, and this is where you can add in some effects. You go to Custom, you can add in the vignette. So I'm going to make this extreme just so you can see this. So you can see you get that black vignette, or you can go all up and get the white vignette. It's really up to you. I'm going to go for something quite subtle, very subtle, and then stretch the midpoint. So it's really quite subtle. You don't see it much, just kind of edges here. And if you want, you can add in some fringe, but that kind of alters your image a lot. So I use that sparingly there. So I'm going to push that back so we don't mess up our image. And then I'm going to click OK. And then if I switch off all these, basically we have, instead of this image, we have this. So happy out. That's pretty much it. It's basically gone through the Photoshop image, how you can add material, how you can light it so it lights up that you don't get too many harsh shadows. You can then also, in Photoshop itself, make adjustments at the end with the lighting. And then in here, you just do very subtle changes to make that extra bit of pop. I hope this has been helpful. I'll be continuing to make videos like this, and I hope to see you in the next one.
you.